Welcome back to the 10th planet. Steve Gerard here. This is lesson number 2, and I'm going to start with some history that paints us a picture from our past of Planet X passing and the written account as recorded in a book which is an anthology of ancient manuscripts called the Kolbrin. It's referred to as the Kolbrin Bible, but don't consider it a Bible like we use the term Bible today, whether we're speaking of a particular, King James or New American Standard. It's not a Bible in that sense. It's not Holy Spirit inspired, but it is an ancient record of our past, and several of the stories within speak to this subject. And so it's going to be a little bit of dry reading, and I've never heard anybody on the internet reading from the Kolbrin as I plan to do here going forward. So sit back. If you have a copy of the Kolbrin, you might want to skip this lesson and go to lesson number 3, which isn't produced yet, but it will be. And let's see what we can learn from our past. In CRT chapter 3, verse 1, it is known, and the story comes down from ancient times, that there was not one creation, but two, a creation and a recreation. It is a fact known to the wise that the earth was utterly destroyed once, then reborn on a second wheel of creation. Verse 2. At the time of the great destruction of earth, God caused a dragon from out of the heaven to come and encompass, or we could say today to form a circle about her, to compass her about. There we go. The dragon was frightful to behold. It lashed its tail. So right there we have two clues. The term dragon was used to identify this event, and it describes the dragon, as one would expect, having a tail. It breathed out fire and hot coals, and a great catastrophe was inflicted upon mankind. The body of the dragon was wreathed in a cold, bright light. We have here a third clue, that it was very cold and that it did emanate a light. And beneath, on the belly, was a ruddy hued glow. The word ruddy meaning red. There's a fourth clue for us. While behind it trailed a flowing tail of smoke. It spewed out cinders and hot stones, and its breath was foul and stenchful, poisoning the nostrils of men. Its passage caused great thunderings and lightnings to rend the thick, darkened sky. There's yet another clue. The lightnings that it's describing would be and will be in the near future the effect between its magnetosphere and Earth's magnetosphere, that there are going to be lightning bolts between the two, which will be unlike anything modern mankind certainly has ever witnessed. All heaven and earth were made hot. So global warming is part of the effect of the electromagnetic interference with our sun, which is also in turn causing the earth to heat up. And this, of course, is a debated science today. The thing that really should be debated is not whether or not the earth is warming up. It is. This is a fact. But what is causing it? Is it man's use of carbon, burning oil and coal, or is it something else that man has zero control over? The seas were loosened from the cradles and rose up, pouring across the land. One of the known effects that Planet X's passing will have upon the Earth is when the pole shift occurs, when the mantle of the Earth slides, the oceans will be left in a lurch. They're not going to move as quickly as the landmass will, and on the rebound, they're going to have tidal waves, which are predicted. I have heard numbers of 300 to 600 feet tall, and the government has new futuristic maps of the United States that shows 300 miles of our coastlands destroyed. And if you ever look at population centers, you'll see that most of them are on oceans, on our waterways. So a good majority of the people will perish in these tsunamis. There was an awful shrilling trumpeting, which outpowered even the howling of the unleashed winds. Computer models, when Planet X passes by and when the tail passes by, it's anticipated by computer models that we here on Earth will see straight line winds of up to 300 miles per hour without let up, not gusts, solid 300-mile-an-hour winds. Verse 3. Men stricken with terror went mad at the awful sight in the heavens. They were loosed from their senses and dashed about, crazed, not knowing what they did. The breath was sucked from their bodies, and they were burnt with a strange ash. One of the things that is anticipated, Planet X is made up of iron ore, and there is a dust cloud from this iron oxide that covers the face of this planet. And it's anticipated that this red dust, which I don't know whether it's going to have any heat signature to it or whether it's just going to be ambient temperature, but we can expect to see a large amount of red dust just before the passing. Then it passed, leaving Earth enwrapped within a dark and glowering mantle, which was ruddily lit up inside. The bowels of the earth were torn open in great writhing upheavals, and a howling whirlwind rent the mountains apart. So there are going to be shifts in our tectonics, the tectonic plates, mountains. The Bible describes mountains and islands being moved out of their places. So we're talking about huge earthquakes, uh, splits, large, sinkholes. And actually, we're already experiencing that on a small scale prior to the actual event. The wrath of the sky monster was loosed in the heavens. It lashed about in flaming fury, roaring like 1,000 thunders. It poured down fiery destruction amid a welter of thick black blood. So awesome was the fearfully aspected thing that the memory mercifully departed from man. His thoughts were smothered under a cloud of forgetfulness. Now, this is something that's been described in the past. Mankind, in the early opening stages of one of the early Earth ages, and this is a topic that we're not going to be able to get into and discuss here in this program, but if you do some research, it's commonly taught amongst Native American peoples of not just American, but all Native peoples around the world that there have been in our past, forgotten for the most part from mankind's memory, previous Earth ages. And this is an interesting, very interesting aspect that I would like to be able to address more in depth in the future, but I think its purpose would not interest too many people. And so let's just deal basically with the here and now. Verse 5, the earth vomited forth great gusts of foul breath from awful mouths opening up in the midst of the land. The evil breath bit at the throat before it drove men mad and killed them. Those who did not die in this manner were smothered under a cloud of red dust and ashes from the iron oxide that this planet will be putting off as it passes by, or were swallowed by the yawning mouths of earth, or crushed beneath crashing rocks. So we're talking sinkholes, opening up of earthquakes, things of this nature. Verse 6, the first sky monster, did you catch that? This is a clue. The first sky monster was joined by another, which swallowed the tail of the one going before. But the two could not be seen at once. Well, the work done by Gil Broussard and his maps, based upon the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean records, astronomical records left to us over 1,000 years old, describe two passings. The first passing, which would be the first dragon, the first head, as Planet X comes into our solar system from the 360-year cycle, as it comes from outer space into our inner space. When it passes by the Earth, it will loop around our sun, which will change its direction back to its other sun that it circulates around, referred to as the Nemesis star system. What we're dealing with here, basically, folks, is what's called a binary star system. And binary star systems are very common in the universe. 74% of star systems are binary star systems. Approximately 14% of star systems are trinary. So that only leaves a handful of star systems that are neither binary or trinary. So this is not something uncommon. And once Planet X loops back around, we'll see the head a second time, but you can't see them both at the same time. And the reason being is that there's a 5-month orbit once it passes by Earth around our sun as it circles, it makes its elliptical circle back around 5 months later. And this is what's being described here is the two heads with the tail. Now the tail is probably one of the worst parts of this whole event that's going to take place. As Planet X passes through the Kuiper belt out beyond Pluto, and also the asteroid belt, which is between Mars and Jupiter, it's going to attract perhaps millions of meteors of various sizes. Meteors from perhaps the size of a fist to 140 miles in diameter and everything in between. So this tail is something that Earth will be passing through every time it comes around the sun in a yearly 365 and a quarter day cycles. And it won't pass once, it will pass twice. Once from the tail that it left on its return, and then shortly later, a second time, the tail, the asteroid belt from when it came into our solar system. So for several years, and with lessening destruction from year to year, Earth will experience this tail. In fact, we're going to see that amongst the Aztec and the Mayans, Quetzalcoatl is described as a two-headed serpent with with a body. That body represents its tail with a head at both ends. And this is one of their greatest sun gods, if not the greatest sun god that's worshipped. And we'll get a little more into that. Let me see if I can pick back up. The two could not be seen at once. The sky monsters, plural, okay, monsters, reigned and raged above the earth, doing battle to possess it. But the many-bladed sword of God cut them in pieces, and their falling bodies enlarged the land and the sea. And I think what we're describing here is meteors as the cutting of the pieces and the falling bodies. Verse 7, in this manner the first earth was destroyed by calamity, descending from out of the skies. The vaults of heaven had opened to bring forth monsters more fearsome than any that ever haunted the uneasy dreams of men. So they're painting a picture here, okay? Verse 8, men and their dwelling places were gone, only sky boulders, which I would consider to be asteroids, and red earth from the iron oxide dust remained where once they were. But amidst all the desolation, a few survived. For man is not easily destroyed. They crept out from caves. Oh, I wish I could get into this. I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out. One of the most common questions that I get when I teach the Bible at the jail and prison settings in our area: Steve, where did Cain get his wife? He went to the land of Nod, and there's only two explanations. And the one is that he married one of his many sisters, Adam and Eve, after Cain and Abel and Seth. It's recorded that they had many other children and that he simply married one of his many sisters. Well, it would have been very easy for God to have said he married his sister so and so who lived in such and such a place. But that's not quite the way the narrative came through. It goes against the grain of many people that prior to Adam, but there's a lot of evidence, okay? And we don't have time to get into all the evidence, but I'm just going to throw this out, maybe something you want to look into later on your own. That there were previous Earth ages that were inhabited by hominids, humanoid type beings, not created in the image of God as Adam was. And what happened to them? Well, easy answer. They were all killed and destroyed in the flood, in Noah's flood. And so their remains would be close to 5,000 years old. And there are, in fact, remains of humanoid type beings in an area of science called forbidden geology. And if you're brave enough to look into the matter, you might get some answers for some really tough Bible questions. But like I said, that's another study. In this manner, the first earth was destroyed by calamity descending from out of the skies. The vaults of heaven had opened to bring forth monsters more fearsome than any that ever haunted the uneasy dreams of men. Men in their dwelling places were gone, only sky boulders remained where once they were, but amidst all the desolation a few survived. For man is not easily destroyed. They crept out from the caves and came down from the mountainsides. Their eyes were wild, and their limbs trembled. Their bodies shook, and their tongues lacked control. Their faces were twisted, and the skin hung loose on their bones. They were as maddened wild beasts driven into an enclosure before flames. They knew no law, being deprived of all the wisdom they once had, and those who had guided them were gone. Now we're going to skip to verse 13. The waters were purified, the sediment sank, and life increased in abundance. Life was renewed, but it was different. Man survived, but he was not the same. The sun was not as it had been, and the moon had been taken away. Man stood in the midst of renewal and regeneration. He looked up into the heavens above in fear, for the awful powers of destruction lurking there. Henceforth, the placid skies would hold a terrifying secret, and they still hold a terrifying secret today. Verse 14. Man found the new earth firm and the heavens fixed. He rejoiced, but also feared, for he lived in dread that the heavens would again bring forth monsters and crash about him. When men came forth from their hiding places and refuges, the world their fathers had known was gone forever. The face of the land was changed, and earth was littered with rocks and stones. And I believe that would be from the meteor and asteroids that fell to the earth during the passing. which had fallen when the structure of heaven collapsed. One generation groped in the desolation and gloom. And as the gloom and as the thick darkness were dispelled, its children believed they were witnessing a new creation. Time passed, memory dimmed, and the record of events was no longer clear. Generation followed generation, and as the ages unfolded, new tongues and new tales replaced the old. This new creation is commonly referred to as the creation gap between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2. And you can look that subject up on the internet and see that there's been much written about this. Chapter 4, verse 1. This comes from the scroll of Kerobel, I'm going to butcher his last name, Bakthurman, who wrote, "The forebears of all the nations of man were once one people, and they were the elect of God, who delivered all the earth over to them. All the people, the beasts of the field, the creatures of the wasteland, and the things that grow. They dwelt through long ages in lands of peace and plenty." Verse 3. There were some who struggled harder, were more disciplined, because their forefathers had crossed the great dark void. Their desires were turned Godward, and they were called the children of God. Verse 4. Their country was undulating and forested. It was fertile, having many rivers and marshes. There were great mountains to the east and to the west, and in the north was a vast stony plain. Verse 5. Then came the day when all things became still and apprehensive, for God caused a sign, that's S-I-G-N, to appear in the heavens, H-E-A-V-E-N-S. I'm doing this to emphasize these two words. A sign, singular, where? In the heavens. We'll speak more of that later. So that men should know the earth would be afflicted, and the sign, we're fixing to get told what the sign was. The sign was a strange star. So it was a star, but not just a regular star. It was a strange star. GN chapter 1, verse 14. Then God said, "Let there be lights." This is Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. I guess we're going to get into it now rather than later. Genesis 1:14. Then God said, quote, "Let there be lights," which the word lights means luminaries, light or bearers or light bearers, "in the expanse of the heavens." Now, there are several things that these luminaries or lights do. To, number one, separate the day from the night. So that's one of the purposes. And secondly, let them be for signs. You look the word up, number 226, oath, appearing. I'm giving you the definition now. Appearing, a signal, literally or figurative, as a flag, a beacon, a monument, an omen, a prodigy, evidence, a mark, a miracle, an ensign, a token. Let them be for signs and for seasons. This is the third purpose of the luminaries. The word seasons, number 4150, moed or moadah, an appointment, a festival, a signal, as appointed beforehand. a feast. So therefore, the feast days for setting the time of God's feasts, his festivals, his holy days. Verse 6, we're back to the Colburn. The star grew. There's another clue for us. In the past, the Chinese and Japanese, Korean accounts tracked this, what they call the guest star, for shortly over 2-year period. And when Planet X first appears to the naked eye in the distant, it'll be in the southern hemisphere, so look toward the south. It will first appear as a very small star. You can see the backdrop that I have here. There are small stars, and then there are larger stars, and they get even larger still, okay? So it will appear first as a very small star, but it will be moving, and each night it will be moving in a one direction. It's not going to be bouncing all around, okay? Because it has an elliptical orbit that it's following. The star grew and waxed to a great brightness as it gets closer and closer to planet Earth, and because it's anywhere from 7 to 10 times the size of Earth, it's going to appear much, much larger than anything mankind has ever seen in its past. And was awesome to behold. It put forth horns and sang. These horns are described as wings, sometimes as horns, because the iron oxide is pushed off on what appears to be either side of the planet, and they jut out from the side kind of like the wings of an airplane do, or jet. It put forth horns and sang, being unlike any other ever seen. So men, seeing it, said among themselves, surely this is God appearing in the heavens above us. Now, I happen to believe that this is the genesis of all the ancient mystic sun god pagan worship and all the gods of ancient peoples. The star was not God, though it was directed by his design, as is everything in the universe. But the people had not the wisdom to understand. Verse 7. Then God manifested himself in the heavens. His voice was as the roll of thunders, and he was clothed with smoke and fire. He carried lightnings in his hand, and his breath, falling upon the earth, brought forth brimstone and embers. His eye was a black void, and his mouth an abyss containing the winds of destruction. One of the names for Planet X is the Destroyer. He encircled the whole of the heavens. And if you look at some of Gil Broussard's graphs, you'll see that it passes through all of the constellations. Bearing upon his back a black robe adorned with stars. This is one of the characteristics of the asteroid field. I got my cat whining in the background. I guess she wants to go out. She'll have to wait. Such was the likeness and manifestation of God in those days. Awesome was his countenance, terrible his voice of wrath. The sun and moon hid themselves in fear, and there was a heavy darkness over the face of the earth. God passed through the spaces of the heavens above with a mighty roar and a loud trumpeting, and swept clean. Let me make sure I didn't jump ahead. A loud trumpeting. Then came the grim dead silence and black red lit twilight of doom. Great fires and smoke rose up from the ground, and men gasped for air. The land was rent asunder and swept clean by a mighty deluge of waters. A hole opened up in the middle of the land, the waters entered, and it sank beneath the seas. The mountains of the east and west were split apart and stood up in the midst of the waters, which raged about the northland, tilted and turned over on its side. This is commonly referred to in modern science as a pole shift. And we have evidence of pole shifts in our history, the biblical history of the Nebra disk, which we'll probably have one whole lesson on the Nebra disk in the future. Then again the tumult and the clamor ceased, and all was silent. In the quiet stillness, madness broke out among men. Frenzy and shouting filled the air. They fell upon one another in senseless, wanton bloodshed. Neither did they spare woman or child, for they knew not what they did. They ran unseeing, dashing themselves to destruction. They fled to caves and were buried, and taking refuge in trees were hung. There was rape, murder, and violence of every kind. This is just a prelude of what's coming, folks. The deluge of water swept back, and the land was purged clean. Rain beat down unceasingly, and there were great winds. The surging waters overwhelmed the land, and man, his flocks, and his gardens, and all his work ceased to exist. Some of the people were saved upon the mountainsides and upon the flotsam, which means floating wreckage or debris from a ship or its cargo. But they were scattered far apart over the face of the earth. They fought for survival in the lands of uncouth people amid coldness. They survived in caves and sheltered places. The land of the little people and the land of giants, the land of the neckless ones, and the land of marshes and mists. The lands of the east and west were all inundated. The mountain land and the lands of the south, where there is gold and great beasts, were not covered by the waters. Men were distracted and in despair. They rejected the unseen God behind all things for something which they had seen. And what is it they saw? They saw this rogue star. And known by its manifestation, they were less than children in those days, and could not know that God had inflicted the earth in understanding and not willfully, for the sake of man and the correction of his ways. See, God has a purpose behind sending Planet X to this earth. And if you read through the book of Revelation and Isaiah, several chapters in Isaiah, we get the purpose behind why God is sending this destruction. It's ultimately for man's good, and he gets into the reason why. We're almost done. The earth is not for the pleasure of man, but is a place of instruction for his soul. A man more easily feels the stirrings of his spirit in the face of disaster than in the lap of luxury. The tuition means a charge or fee for instruction. The tuition of the soul is a long and arduous course of instruction and training. God is good, and from good evil cannot come. He is perfect, and perfection cannot produce imperfection. Only the limited understanding of man sees imperfection in that which is perfect and for its purpose. This grievous affliction of man was another of his great tests. He failed, and in so doing followed the paths of unnatural gods of his making. Man makes gods by naming them, but wherein this is the benefit to him. Evil comes into the midst of mankind, spawned by the fears and ignorance of men, and evil man becomes an evil spirit. And whatever evil there is on earth comes either from the evil of spirits or the evil of men. Now, these gods that they named are the sun gods, and just a short list here. The Aborigines call him Hi, Y-H-I. The Africans, Liza. The Chinese, the 10 Suns. The Egyptian call him Ra or Horus or the winged sun god. The Greek call him Apollo. The Japanese, Ama or Tarasu. The Polynesian refer to the sun god as Maui, M-A-U-I. The Romans, Apollo. The Sumerians, Utu. And the Mayan, Quetzalcoatl, which means the plumed serpent. And a couple of verses here to close with. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 15. That which is has been already, and that which will be has already been. For God seeks what has passed by. Isaiah 48:3. I declared the former things long ago, and they went forth from my mouth, and I proclaimed them. Suddenly I acted, and they came to pass. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. And to interpret that, if you want to know what lies ahead, simply look to our past. It's going to happen again. Is there anything of which one might say, quote, see this? It is new. Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things. Earlier means the first or former. And also of the latter things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. So this is the problem that man faces right now. This ancient knowledge has been forgotten, either by accident or intentionally. Either way, mankind faces the most devastating event in the near future. And like the children's game of old, ole oxen free, ready or not, here I come. And we will pick up and look at some other aspects in the future in lesson 3 of the history that uh, tells us what is coming in our future. So I hope this long reading has touched a nerve with some people. My wife always tells me people are going to go to sleep. Well, you know, when we're looking for something that's as important as this topic is to the soul salvation of mankind, sometimes we have to uh, get a little bit out of our comfort zone and dig deep. So I hope and pray that something here has stirred you up to at least give uh, consideration to the credence that so many people out there, not just myself, I'm just a small, I'm not even a pollywog in the puddle here, but there are some people been doing this research for a long time that know a lot more than I do. So, but I'm trying to come at things from a different perspective to give people who for whatever reason uh, can't can't receive direct knowledge, but perhaps this ancient knowledge will stir you up. Well, Maranatha, God bless.